What was the single worst year to be alive? It's a question that invites a grim parade of contenders. Perhaps your mind jumps to 1347, the year the Black Death began its merciless march across Europe, eventually wiping out half its population. Or maybe you think of 1918, when the Spanish flu infected a third of the world and killed with a speed and ferocity that dwarfed the ongoing First World War. Surely, living through the mud and terror of 1943, in the depths of the Second World War, would be a candidate. These were all, without question, times of unimaginable horror. But they are not the answer. According to a growing consensus of historians and scientists, the absolute worst period to be alive began in a year you've likely never considered, 536 AD. This wasn't a year of plague or world war, at least not at first. It was something more primal, more mysterious, and in many ways more terrifying. It was the year the sun simply seemed to give up. Those who have painstakingly pieced together the evidence from this obscure time describe it as the beginning of one of the bleakest periods in all of history. It didn't just bring hardship, it plunged much of the Northern Hemisphere into a literal and figurative darkness that would last for years, setting the stage for famine, social collapse, and a pandemic that would redraw the map of the known world. This is the story of that year, a time when the sky fell, the world grew cold, and humanity was pushed to the very brink of existence. The year 536 began not with a bang, but with a strange and terrifying dimming. From the heart of the crumbling Roman world to the burgeoning civilizations of Asia, something blotted out the sky. It wasn't the swift, total darkness of an eclipse, but a persistent, mysterious twilight that descended without warning and refused to leave. In Constantinople, the bustling capital of the Byzantine Empire, the historian Procopius watched the sky with a sense of dread. For the sun gave forth its light without brightness, like the moon during this whole year, he wrote, and it seemed exceedingly like the sun in eclipse, for the beams it shed were not clear. Imagine this reality. For 18 months, the world was trapped in a perpetual gloom. The sun, that life-giving constant of human existence, was reduced to a pale, sickly disk in the sky. The Italian statesman Cassiodorus noted the unsettling effects, the lack of proper shadows at noon, the sun's strange bluish hue, the disconcerting coolness of the air even in the height of summer. He lamented that people were surprised to see no shadows of our bodies at noon and had to endure a winter without storms, a spring without mildness, and a summer without heat. For the people living through this, the experience was profoundly apocalyptic. In a pre-scientific world, there was no meteorological explanation, only supernatural dread. They were living inside a divine omen, a sign of God's immense displeasure, or perhaps the very beginning of the end of days. Their prayers went unheard as the fog persisted, week after week, month after month. The terror wasn't just in the gloom itself, but in the complete and utter uncertainty of its cause or its end. This was no localized anomaly. As scholars later discovered, the eerie phenomenon was global. The Irish chronicles recorded a failure of bread from the years 536, 539. Far to the east, reports from China told of summer frosts and snow, leading to a massive delay in harvests and widespread famine. Other records from Mesopotamia to Mesoamerica speak of severe drought during the same period. A single unifying catastrophe had gripped the entire Northern Hemisphere, wrapping it in a cold, dark shroud. For centuries, the mystery fog of 536 remained just that, a terrifying, unexplained chapter in human history. The gods had been blamed, the end of the world foretold, but the true culprit lay hidden, waiting for the tools of modern science to uncover it. The answer was not divine wrath, but a force of nature so powerful it could alter the climate of the entire planet. The perpetrator was a volcano, or perhaps more than one. Scientists now believe that in late 535 or early 536, a colossal volcanic eruption blasted a cataclysmic amount of ash and sulfur compounds high into the atmosphere. This wasn't a typical eruption where lava flows and ash fall locally. This was an event of such explosive force that it injected a massive plume of material directly into the stratosphere, the stable atmospheric layer above the clouds and weather. Once there, fine particles of ash and sulfur dioxide gas underwent a chemical transformation, creating a vast aerosol veil of sulfuric acid droplets. This shimmering, reflective blanket essentially acted as a planetary sunshade, scattering and blocking sunlight before it could reach and warm the Earth's surface. This phenomenon is now known as a volcanic winter. The definitive proof, the smoking gun, was found frozen in time, deep within the ice sheets of Greenland and Antarctica. By drilling down through millennia of accumulated snow, scientists can extract ice cores that provide a perfect, layered timeline of Earth's atmospheric history. In 2013, a team analyzing a core from the Colle Nefeti Glacier in the Swiss Alps found a distinct layer of microscopic volcanic glass shards, or tephra, and high concentrations of sulfate deposits. This layer was dated with incredible precision to the spring of 536 AD. Subsequent analysis of cores from Greenland and Antarctica confirmed the finding, showing a massive spike in atmospheric sulfates that began in 536 and continued with another major event in 540. The chemical signature of the tephra points to an eruption in the Northern Hemisphere, with volcanoes in Iceland and El Salvador being the prime suspects. The sheer magnitude required to cause such a prolonged global dimming dwarfs most eruptions in recorded history. It was a geological event of almost unimaginable power, far surpassing the famous explosions of Krakatoa in 1883 or Mount Pinatubo in 1991, which caused noticeable but far less severe global cooling. The sky hadn't fallen. The Earth itself had thrown up a veil to block out the sun. The volcanic winter triggered a catastrophic chain reaction, a domino effect of disaster that rippled across the globe. The first and most immediate consequence of the sun-dimming aerosol veil was a shocking plunge in global temperatures. The summer of 536 became the coldest in over 2,000 years, dropping by as much as 2.5 degrees Celsius, 4.5 degrees Fahrenheit, on average across the Northern Hemisphere. This may not sound like a drastic number in modern terms, but for agricultural societies living on the edge of subsistence, it was an absolute death sentence. The cold was relentless and unseasonal. In China, chroniclers recorded bizarre and devastating weather patterns, including dense fog that never lifted and yellow dust that rained down like snow. They noted that frost and snow fell in the middle of summer, in August, completely destroying the grain harvest. Half a world away in Ireland, the Gaelic Annals grimly stated that a failure of bread persisted for years. Across Europe, from Scandinavia to the Mediterranean, vineyards withered and crops in the fields failed to ripen. The delicate balance of the seasons, the predictable rhythm upon which all human life depended, had been broken. Widespread crop failure led inevitably to the second domino, famine. This wasn't just a year of scarcity, it was a prolonged period of starvation that hollowed out communities. People were forced to eat whatever they could, find roots, bark, and perhaps things far more desperate. The lack of food created a world of skeletal figures, of parents unable to feed their children, of entire villages succumbing to hunger. The social fabric, woven from threads of trade, cooperation, and order, began to unravel. This led to the third domino, societal collapse. As hunger turned to desperation, communities turned on each other. Hoarding, violence, and banditry became rampant. People abandoned their dead lands, becoming climate refugees in a desperate search for food and safety, only to find the same bleak conditions wherever they went. Economic systems ground to a halt. Trade routes, the arteries of civilization, became choked with fear and chaos, not goods and ideas. Political authorities, unable to provide grain or security, lost their legitimacy. This wasn't just a bad year, it was the start of a multi-generational crisis. Climatologists have given this period a name, the Late Antique Little Ice Age. The eruption of 536 was its starting gun, firing the world into a century-long dark age of cold, hunger, and chaos from which some parts of civilization would not recover for centuries. As the world reeled from years of cold, darkness, and starvation, it seemed impossible that things could get any worse. Humanity was already on its knees, battered by a force of nature it could not comprehend. But the catastrophe of 536 had one final, horrifying domino left to tip. It had created the perfect stage for an even deadlier killer, one that would not attack the crops in the fields, but the very bodies of the people themselves. In 541 AD, just as the sky was beginning to clear, the Justinian Plague arrived, delivering the knockout blow to a civilization that had no strength left to fight. The plague was almost certainly a consequence of the preceding years of misery. The long winter and famine had created a perfect storm for disease. Malnutrition had become the norm across vast swaths of the population, leaving millions with severely compromised immune systems. A healthy, well-fed person has a fighting chance against infection, but a body already weakened by years of hunger is defenseless. The social chaos was also a factor. Mass migrations of starving people could have helped spread the pathogen to previously isolated areas, while rats, the primary carriers of the plague-infested fleas, thrived in the squalor of collapsing cities. The disease, caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis, the same culprit behind the Black Death, centuries later first erupted in the Egyptian port of Pelusium, a key hub for grain shipments to the Byzantine Empire. From there, it traveled on grain ships and merchant vessels, spreading with terrifying speed to Constantinople and then fanning out across the Mediterranean world. The historian Procopius, who survived it, left a chilling eyewitness account of its horrors: the agonizing buboes, the delirium, the swift and certain death. At its peak in the capital, he reported that 10 people were dying per day, with bodies being stacked in the streets because there was no one left to bury them. The plague of Justinian was apocalyptic. It swept through Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East, killing an estimated 1/3 to 1/2 of the population in the regions it touched. It halted the ambitious Emperor Justinian's attempts to reconquer the lost Western Roman Empire and brought the Byzantine economy to a grinding halt. It was the final, brutal stroke that ensured the classical world of Rome and Greece would never be reborn. The 1-2 punch of the volcanic winter and the subsequent plague was simply too much to bear. The darkness of 536 had brought famine and despair. The pestilence of 541 brought death on a scale that beggars belief. Together, they created the absolute worst time to be alive. Looking back, the story of 536 and its aftermath is a chilling chronicle of cause and effect. It begins not with human folly, but with a random, violent spasm of the earth itself. A massive volcanic eruption unleashed a cascade of horrors: a sunless sky, a world plunged into unnatural cold, and fields that refused to yield their bounty. This climatic shock triggered widespread famine, which in turn shattered economies and tore apart the very fabric of society. And upon this broken, starving, and desperate world, the Justinian Plague descended like a final judgment, reaping a harvest of death that dwarfed all that came before it. It wasn't just one bad year, it was the beginning of a century of decline, a true dark age ushered in by a veil of volcanic dust. The tale serves as a humbling reminder of our profound dependence on the delicate balance of our planet's systems. It reveals the terrifying fragility of civilization. In our modern world, we are insulated by technology, supported by global supply chains, and armed with scientific knowledge. Yet, the story of 536 forces us to ask a crucial question: are we truly safer? Or is our intricate, interconnected global society just a more complex and brittle house of cards? Imagine a similar event today: prolonged disruption to the global climate that cripples agriculture and severs the digital and physical networks that crisscross our planet. Would our sophistication save us, or would our very complexity be our undoing? The people of 536 faced the end of their world with no answers, only terror and faith. They endured a twilight existence, watching the foundations of their lives crumble for reasons they could never know. Their survival through that long, cold, and desperate night is perhaps the most remarkable part of the story. Their forgotten struggle is a distant echo, a warning from the past about the awesome, impersonal power of nature and the thin veneer of order that we too often take for granted.